Welcome to everybody who's coming to join us for our Eco Gardeners Question Time hosted by Eco Synagogue. I'm Rabbi Mark Goldsmith, and I'm going to be joined by my colleagues, rabbis of Eco Synagogue, who help to make sure that this happens. Rabbi David Mason, Rabbi Tanya Saknovich, Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, and by our wonderful panelists, of whom we will hear more in a moment, and with many thanks to Andrea Pass, who is the Eco Synagogue administrator and also works with the Board of Deputies, with whom we're partners, that enables us to do everything that we're doing and helps us to be able to do so. So my privilege is to begin just by introducing a little bit about what's happening. Our chair today, I'll speak about in a moment, but first of all, let's just remind ourselves where we are in the Jewish year and why, therefore, this is, of course, the time that we should be doing. Here we are in the sukkah at our synagogue, Edgware and Hendon Reformed Synagogue, made out of things that people have grown, of course, in their gardens all around the community, with all generations waving the lulav, when we are all connected to nature through this festival. Indeed, of course, the Jewish cycle of festivals is based on our interaction with nature in so many different ways. We are people who are in the heritage of Adam to tend to the garden and to look after it, to work it and to look after it, as Adam was told in the Garden of Eden together with Eve. There are gardens in various places in our Bible, of course, sometimes planted to be enjoyed, possibly not always for the best reasons. Noah planted his vineyard, for example, at the end of the Ark episode, and managed to get himself roaring drunk. But that's another story. And of course, the Song of Songs is all set in a garden. So gardens are very much part of our Jewish life and part of our Hebrew Bible. At Sukkot, we celebrate the produce of the year, and of course here in Britain, it's the last of the apples. We just finished picking for ourselves the last of our Bramleys, and we've been enjoying baked apples straight in the oven. It's been absolutely gorgeous. And the last tomato was picked last week, so perhaps again this is just the right time to be doing this. So the way tonight is going to work is we are going to be chaired by Matthew Biggs, of which more in a moment, and we're going to ask you, please, to put your questions in the chat. So if you're not so familiar with Zoom, what you do is you at the very bottom of your screen there'll be a little quotation box which says chat. Put your questions in the chat, just type them in there, and we will make sure, and Matthew will then pick them up and make sure that they are asked. That we may not be able to get to everybody's question, but we'll try our best. We've had a few questions ahead from various people who are enjoying being with us, and hopefully all will work. Now, the one person who is not here that we had hoped was Matthew Thrift from the London Wildlife Trust, who unfortunately had an engagement that was unavoidable, and so he's sadly not able to be with us. However, our panel, who we're going to be introduced to later on, of Nigel Allon, of Philip Friedman, of Louise Lippman, and of Brian Borelowitz, as you'll hear, give us a huge spectrum of gardening experience. Matthew, who is going to be our chair for today, is, as many of you will know, the people's gardener. That's one of the ways that he is described. He is a panelist on Gardener's Question Time, which is how he got to know Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, who so kindly introduced him to us. There was a Gardener's Question Time, the first ever in a synagogue at New North London Synagogue. And they got to know each other, and I know they've continued a friendship, and a friendship over gardens. That GQT at New North London, I think, was just over 2 years ago, if I'm right, and is still there on the BBC website if you'd like to hear it on BBC Sounds, and is a beautiful picture of Jewish relationship with gardens. So really well worth a go. Matthew himself is a gardener, he's a writer, he's a broadcaster. He was trained at the Royal Botanic Garden in Kew and Pershaw College in Birmingham as well, and has written books, all of which are available from his website and other places, I would imagine, as a garden educator. but also the relationship of Sukkot to Matthew is as a Christadelphian. Of course, the Hebrew Bible is a very important part of Christadelphian study, so he's well aware of Leviticus 23 and the 4 species and the Sukkah, and he has a deep interest in Judaism, which has meant that he's had the chance to visit synagogue a few times and to begin to understand how his faith relates to the Jewish faith and Israel's past, present and future. So let me now hand over to Matthew, who's going to introduce our panelists as we go, and I really look forward to you leading us, Matthew. I'm going to start by spotlighting you and will unspotlight you when you tell me to.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. What a wonderful and enlightening, as far as I'm concerned, introduction. And it's lovely to be with so many gardeners as well, because we know that when we're with gardeners, we're going to have a wonderful time. And we have an excellent panel for you. We searched through the community and we couldn't find better. So let's start by spotlighting Philip. Philip, it's a pleasure to meet you. Do tell us, Philip, a little bit about yourself and your gardening experience, because you've been gardening for years, I know that, but not just in London, but you've been gardening elsewhere.
Right. I'll tell you a little bit about my main garden is in the Lake District. We bought our cottage about 44 years ago, and it was just a field. And we decided, what should we do with this? And of course, being in the Lake District, one would go towards rhododendrons and alpines. And it was a labour of love. And it took me about 30 years to get the garden as I really would like it. And I don't believe gardening should be an instant plan. I think gardening should be an organic plan, and that you build on one section at a time until you develop the garden as you feel you'd like it to be. So that's been my main love, is gardening in the Lake District.
But you also garden and enjoy different kinds of gardening, because I was hugely impressed by your CV, because you grow vegetables as well and have a greenhouse.
Oh, right. Well, yes. Well, in London, I also have an allotment. One of our other speakers have an allotment. So I grow a very considerable amount of vegetables on my allotment in Hampstead, and that's in London. And I have my greenhouse, a very nice 15-foot by 10-foot greenhouse, where I propagate all my seeds, both for the flowers in the London garden as well as the vegetables for the allotment. So I'm a pretty busy fella when it comes to gardening.
Yeah, so well, at least if we come round to your house, we'll know where to find you. Let's go next.
Yes, you're in the garden.
Yes. Let's go next to Louise. Louise, tell us a little bit about your gardening background.
Well, my gardening background is currently at the Hockerton Housing Project in Hockerton, near Southwell in Nottinghamshire, and it's a community of sustainable homes which are earth sheltered. So we've already got a garden on the roof, and they require no heating, so we've got minimal energy requirements, and that energy does come from renewable sources. So we've got a wind turbine in the field, and we've got photovoltaic panels on the roof next to the earth. We're also not connected to mains water, so we've got a great biodiversity, and we process our own waste. So we've got we use the water that comes in. Obviously, we're in England, so that's not really a problem, isn't it? And we've got a reed bed, which again is a great biodiverse area which processes most of our waste.
Louise, what are you putting into the ground?
What are we putting into the ground?
So as far as vegetables are concerned?
All sorts of vegetables, all sorts of trees. We grow food. That's what we do. We grow food, because actually what I was going to say is that the energy that we save by those methods that I've said about how we actually live is very little in comparison to the amount of energy that we save, the carbon dioxide produced savings from food growing, because the amount of carbon dioxide produced from food growing is absolutely huge, with obviously the pesticides, etc. So we use sustainable methods, organic methods, permaculture methods, biodynamic methods, all of these things really.
Have you been out in the garden today, Louise? If you have, what have you been doing?
Have I been in the garden today? All I've done today actually is picked a couple of apples to eat for my lunch. But no, I have been doing the other thing that I do.
Okay. Brian, let's come over to you. Now, Brian, you are a keen vegetable grower, I know, but you also have a garden centre and landscaping business. How's business for you at the moment?
Brian, you need to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Yes, you can probably hear from my accent that I'm not native to the United Kingdom. In fact, I'm native to Cape Town in South Africa. And I grew up in Cape Town and actually worked quite extensively in farming in South Africa through all my holidays and also university holidays. And I came here in 1975 and have actually been involved in horticulture ever since, for all those years. I started out working in a garden center, which was great fun for several years, and then became self-employed thanks to a push from my mother-in-law, who kindly bought me a van actually and said, it's time for you to start, my boy. You've got to support my daughter, so get on with it.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, so we developed into a landscaping company with, by and large, we have around about 20 to 25 staff, and we a design build operation. My wife Zia trained under the great Robin Williams as a garden designer. And we work with other garden designers, and we do all what's called hard and soft landscaping. Hard landscaping, with brick and wood and steel and paving and metal and etc. And we also do lots of planting, lots of hedging, lots of soft landscaping, and we have a small maintenance division as well.
Brian, whereabouts is your garden centre? Whereabouts in the
We don't have a garden centre. We only have storage premises. But my other love, separate from that, is actually growing things, and particularly allotmenteering. And we have several allotments within our family, all side by side in Child's Hill. And I've often said to my wife that she's trying to plough a furrow from Child's Hill to our home in Golders Green, all of which we own by hook or by crook. So we've got several allotments already, and we're well on our way to getting to Golders Green from Child's Hill.
Well, keep pushing. Nigel, over to you. Now, Nigel, when you communicated with me earlier on, you were explaining about your move from Glasgow, but also your introduction to horticulture. Tell us all a little bit more about that.
Well, I'll tell you first of all how I moved from Glasgow. About 5 years ago, we have 4 children, all now in northwest London. And as they were coming up in terms, we suddenly realised it's time to come down. And it was time to move to an apartment. And I said to my wife, I don't mind moving to an apartment, but I've got to have a garden. I'm not good at it, and I'm not going to tell you how to make all the mistakes and not cry about it. I'm not that good at it, but I love it. And so it so happened that an apartment came available with a garden. Well, there was nothing there. It was actually really a lot of bricks, about 15 doors from my daughter. So what could I do? We bought it in Finchley and we arrived here. And we found such a difference because where I came from, it rained all the time. And I mean, it rained and it rained and it rained. And if you want to grow tomatoes, you're lucky. I grew them for years. I was lucky if I had a red one by the end of the season. And I come down here and I've got a little greenhouse, and instead of keeping it warm, I'm trying to learn how to cool it down. I'm looking at it in the summer, and inside the greenhouse, it's hitting 50 degrees. I'm throwing buckets of water on the ground, everything. But I love it because now I grow tomatoes and millions of them. And I even have them in my front garden, so people come by and stare at them. And would you like me to tell you where they're planted in the front garden at the moment?
Yes, please.
What happened, my daughter's very friendly with one of the curators from the Tate Modern. And a year before we came down, they had a big exhibition, and they had enormous triangles of wood made, filled with soil from all parts of London. And they just left them alone to show people that ecologically everywhere was different, and just to see what had grown. When they were finished, they didn't know what to do with them. And my daughter's her friend said, would you like a couple? And I said, yes, I'd love a couple. So I now have a couple of raised triangular beds in the front garden filled with tomato. Well, they were filled with tomato bushes until a week ago. And people look at them and say, why have you built them that shape? And I said, I didn't build them that shape. That's come from the Tate Modern. But thank you very much.
What's going into those next then, Brian? Sorry, what's going into those next, Nigel?
Next, probably cucumbers, pea pods. My grandchildren love pea pods. So one of them will be cucumbers and the one next to it will be pea pods. I've already got the wood in place for them to grow up. I go over to the park across the road in the spring and pick up all the dead branches, and they become my pea sticks, and they all grow over them, and the kids love them.
I don't think you should answer this question, but a question has just come up on the chat from Lillian Cordell saying, what's your address, Nigel?
111 Etchingham Park Road.
You'll have a crowd out there before.
I'll pull them all out.
Ladies and gentlemen, do start sending in your questions. We know that we have 62 participants actually labelled. I know some of those are panel members and administrative help, but surely now you know the skills of the panel, their abilities and their experience. You want to tap into this. This is a wonderful opportunity to start learning more and thinking ahead and understanding how you can improve your garden. So do keep those questions coming in on the chat. But we did get some earlier questions, and let's start with some of those. One of them was, what plants can the panel recommend for Jewish Care's older adults in care homes, and also how to grow, to grow in our independent living apartments that will survive a warm and dry environment, but also provide well-being through the winter months. So we're looking here now, panel, for some wonderful house plants that will grow in the care homes and in the apartments, but they've got to, of course, be able to survive the warm and dry environment because the central heating will be cranked up, and also provide well-being through the winter months. Now, any of you grow house plants? Do you instantly think of something? I know what I've got that I love that's on my windowsill. Nigel, would you like to take that one?
I'm not the inside guy, but I can talk about outside for a moment. When it comes to a care home and outside, I'm an optometrist, or I was an optometrist as well. Most of these people, their vision will not be as good as it was. They may well still have cataracts, or they may have macular degeneration. So I would concentrate on things, A, with a smell, lavenders, their relations, some of the salvias have a great smell. Honeysuckle, but I would also have things with big flowers on them, because when they can't see, the big flowers will make a big difference. Peonies, even dahlias. That's as far as I'll go just now.
That's a really good point, actually, Nigel, because of course, when people are stuck inside in the cold, particularly as the current circumstances, then you will be looking out of the window, and it will be lovely to see some colour, some leaf shapes, some form. So that's an excellent idea. So what you're doing is bringing us from the house, from the flat, out into the open. So that's a great suggestion. Philip, do you grow any house plants at all, or indoor plants in your greenhouse that could be transferred to being house plants?
Well, I tell you what I grow every spring and summer are
houses.
What's the things I grow, big tall things that I have in the kitchen?
Yes.
Amaryllis.
Amaryllis.
Yes. So I would plant an amaryllis. It starts growing very quickly after you planted it. It has the most interesting leaves. And then, of course, it has this fantastic flower. And it would be a point of interest for everybody. And one plant sometimes can produce 3 stems and with multiple flowers on them. And I think that would be a really interesting thing for people to see in a care home, and a real interesting conversation point.
Philip, that's an excellent selection, because it goes back to what Nigel was saying about it having a visual impact. And the lovely thing about hippeastrums is that you can be buying them now. They're for sale in the shops now. They're a traditional plant for this time of year. If you want a really good selection, then Pheasant Acre Plants on the internet have one of the best selections, and there's a whole range of colours from stripes to dark purple. I have a beautiful salmon coloured one, and the lovely thing called Alione, I think it was called. And the lovely thing about these is that you can grow them from year to year. So once they finish flowering at Christmas, don't throw them away. Pop them in a corner where they don't have to be seen all the time. If you've got a greenhouse, then that's great. Carry on feeding and watering till around about August time, then give them a rest for about a month or so, and then start watering again, and they will flower again, and they can go on and on and on. Do you have any favourites, Brian? Sorry, Brian, could you unmute, please? Thank you.
Right, yes, you can hear me, yeah?
Yes, please.
Okay, I've got a couple of suggestions. One suggestion is, I mean, I know those hot, dry environments, and it's quite difficult to get many things to grow well, particularly because so many plants require a certain amount of humidity, which is what's often absent. I'm just wondering whether there are any possibilities to grow any edibles. I'm always in favor of that. And the kind of things that I think Philip mentioned, pea shoots, or any herbs, or any mint, or any chives, they're all possibilities for those quite dry environments. So that's one possibility. The second option I thought of is the possibility of a succulent arrangement. And you can put succulents together in groups, the echeverias, crassulas. I mean, you can even go with cacti, although, I mean, that's the last thing you want if your site isn't great. But those plants will withstand very dry conditions. And just one other thing I want to mention, and that is always the way to test whether the plant is wet or dry is in those dry environments, the top of the soil always crusts very quickly and the plant looks dry, but it often isn't. And if you just put your finger in the pot and it's moist below the surface, it doesn't need water. And one of the big problems I find for Jewish people is that whenever something's wrong with the plant, they want to do something. They want to feed it. They want to add something. And I always say to them, I know it's not your instinct, but withdraw. Give it less, do less. And one other plant I just want to recommend is this very simple Coleus, yeah, which is a beautiful thing. This one's actually a cutting from a plant at Kew Gardens. I mean, all you need is a little branch broken off and stuck in water. It roots like bilio. And this will grow Coleus in the driest conditions. So there's the Coleus, possibly something to eat, and possibly some succulents.
Thank you, Brian. And we're not going to ask you about how you got hold of a cutting from Kew Gardens. We'll draw a discreet veil over that one, shall we?
You're well advised.
The questions are starting to come in, so let's get going on those, and keep the answers as concise as you can, please, so we can get through as many as we can. So Andy Lucas, what's the last time I can pick tomatoes which are still green? A couple are starting to get some colour, so it is very late in the season for that. So what's the last time that you can pick your tomatoes when they're still green? Louise?
Well, I'll tell a little story about that, is that my mum always told a story, my older brother, who's now older than me and older in his 50s than I am, and his birthday's on the 28th of October. And apparently she went into labour making green tomato chutney, which she had picked that day. So that's the date I know about tomatoes.
Okay, so if anybody's expecting a baby and would like to sort of hasten the process, then get making chutney.
That's it, that's it.
I can vouch for that.
That's my dad.
Oh, okay. Was that, David, was the chutney good?
Very good, very good.
I can't believe you can remember.
And What about picking them when they're green? Do they have to go into tomato chutney?
What we do is,
Sorry.
well, we still got them growing in the polytunnel and they're still turning red. But when the plants get really sort of dying and the tomatoes really look like they're not going to get much more benefit from being on the plant, then we take them off the plants and put them in our conservatory, lay them all out, and they will turn red in the conservatory as well. And in fact, that can go on for quite a few weeks. We can still enjoy them as they turn red.
Does anybody have anything else to add, panel?
Yeah.
Brian?
Can you unmute? The big problem with tomatoes, particularly in public spaces, in allotments, is blight, and the blight tends to become quite bad about a month or 6 weeks ago. And once the stems of tomatoes start to brown and blacken, that's the beginning of the visual sign of blight, and that then transfers into the tomatoes themselves, which go brown. As soon as we get any wind or see the blight on the stems, we tend to pick all those tomatoes green, take them all off, whip the lot off, get the plants out the ground. And my advice is not to compost those plants, but to throw them in the bin. And then all the cut tomatoes you can put on your sill, and they do all turn red, and it's a way of saving them.
Nigel, do you ever have green tomatoes on your plants?
Yes, and I also had the same problem a few weeks ago. There was a high wind in Finchley, and after that, the stems were all going black. I dug them all out and just I took the green ones off. They are chutney with my wife and chutney with friends, and I got rid of the rest into the green bin.
It's interesting, actually, because Gardening Witch have recently done a test on using all the different ways that people ripen tomatoes. So there's one that says if you've got green tomatoes, then put them in the bag with a ripened banana, for example, and the ethylene from the banana within the paper bag will ripen the tomatoes. But what they found was best of all was to pick the perfect green fruit and to store them in a cool place, in a drawer, something like that. And when you needed them during the winter, you could just bring them out, put them on a windowsill, and they would ripen. And I was amazed to read that, because that is exactly what my mum used to do when I was a child. And I think it's probably my first memory of tomatoes. So they found that that's a really good way of doing it. So we've got some excellent tips there. Thank you for those. Now, Tanya says, I'm lucky to live in a development with extensive grounds, including many mature trees, a pond, formal flower beds, grassed areas, formal and informal. Sounds gorgeous. I would appreciate advice on how to encourage wildlife. For example, creating a meadow or bringing in the birds, bearing in mind that we have to balance the desire of the residents for formality and, of course, the age-old budgetary constraints. So anyone had experience? Louise, have you experienced within the area where you live the creation of areas like these?
Oh, absolutely, definitely. What you need here is a bit of mess. A mess is exactly what is required. You can have neat mess if you really want to, if mess is a bit unsettling, which it might be with those formal garden, but any tree cuttings or pruning that you do, you can cut that all to the same length, put it in a nice square area. And in fact, we made one just the other day. Usually we have messy mess piles, but we actually made a neat messy pile just last weekend. And I walked past on Monday morning, and there was a tiny little bird, probably a wren, I'm not very good at identification, just already in this wildlife, flying out of this wildlife area. But yeah, absolutely essential to have a messy area, I would say.
Well, that'd be well received, I would have thought, something like that, a messy area. Philip, in your garden, or your gardens, I should say, do you grow any shrubs or trees that provide fruit for birds, for example?
Yes, I think pyracantha grow very easily, and that's the favourite location for the blackbird in the front of the garden, and the blackbird's always there taking off the red berries. So that's the main source. I don't think I grow anything particularly, especially for the birds, except that I do grow a lot of apples on cordons and pears and plums. And of course, the birds at this time of the year, just when you want to pick them to eat them yourself, they decide they'd like to have some of them as well. So if you have enough apples growing, which I do generally, I don't mind sharing them.
Yes, the pyracantha is interesting because it's thorny, and of course, when the birds nest in there, it actually, I know lots of people are cat lovers, but they need blackbirds need to protect their young. So a thorny shrub like that has a really interesting dual role. What about your fruit? Do you leave some of the fruit for the birds and for wildlife over winter?
Yes, generally speaking, there's always plenty of surpluses. You can leave them there and the birds will gradually eat them as they come along. But I grow about sort of 20 different varieties of apples and pears as cordons up against a wall. And there's usually so much fruit that I don't mind sharing it generally with the villagers as well as the birds.
Brian, you must be asked to design and to create areas for wildlife. Just tell us about some of the easiest ways of doing this.
I mean, there are a lot of obvious things, you know, for example, bird feeders and nests, which are, you know, both very popular. Of course, the issue with the bird feeders is the squirrels, and the best bird feeder, according to Rabbi Wittenberg, is the one where when the bird stands on it, they can feed, but the weight of the squirrel actually closes the food area and the ability of the squirrel to take the nuts out of the feeder. So I recommend those. There are 2 or 3 other things we've done. We have created bug hotels. A bug hotel really is just a small sort of habitation where you might put all sorts of things that little insects will be attracted. Air bricks, hollow bamboo poles.
In the cottage, you should say that.
So all sorts of things where tiny little insects can hide. And in fact, when you come back to them, it's not always so easy to see the wildlife in there, but it's definitely attracted to it. And I like the micro as well as the macro. And this is the ability to look for small things rather than big things. And the other thing we encourage people to do more and more is to leave the seed heads on all their plants over winter and not simply cut them all down. And that does give some further options of wildlife, mostly to birds. I mean, we have over the years done things like, you know, left gaps under fences when we've built them, you know, for either porcupines or you know, and we also, I mean, one's relationship with foxes is quite interesting. It's a sort of love-hate relationship. They're utterly beautiful to look at and are wonderful animals, but also very damaging to the garden, and particularly seed beds in the vegetable garden. But nonetheless, it's just nice to see wildlife, and we try and encourage it as much as possible.
It's interesting, Brian, that you mentioned there the hedgehog, because the hedgehog, for many of us when we were younger, was a very common animal around Britain. And little by little, the numbers have dropped, and they're now actually under threat. So they're getting to the point where they're endangered species in the UK. So cutting a little semicircle at the base of a fence so that they can actually get through, and linking garden to garden and giving them bigger habitat has become very important recently. Judy actually says that she lives on the top floor of a block of flats and has a roof terrace, and it gets quite sunny in the morning and windy. It's roughly north to south. She says she's got some hanging baskets that she bought from the Shore Trust charity in Cannons Park. There's a bit of a plug for them, obviously some good plants going there. And she's planted 2 buddleia, which will attract butterflies. And I think it's 24 species of butterflies have been found on buddleias. And the only other thing she suggests, she says, is a wandering Jew. Could she have any more suggestions for shrubs or herbaceous plants that will attract butterflies? Brian?
On a roof garden in containers.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
I might pass that on to some other member of the panel who may.
Well, while you're thinking, can I be bold and chip in with one of my favourites? Because by my front door we have sedums. Now, sedums are really great because they're succulent plants, so it means that they don't need a lot of moisture at all, and they produce coloured, dense flower heads. They're now called Helioteliphium. The taxonomists have changed their names, but nevertheless, it doesn't seem to bother the butterflies and the bees that absolutely love them. So they're very, very easy to grow. And there's quite a vigorous variety called Madrona, which is very, very good. So that's an excellent one to grow for the butterflies. And a lot of the annuals as well. I have a little area which I sow with hardy annuals. Just a hardy annual mix is great. And of course, lavender. Lots of butterflies, bees and other insects love lavender. But if you do grow lavender, then make sure you check them, because there is a beetle, a very shiny beetle called the rosemary beetle, which unfortunately nibbles the buds of the lavender as well. So you need to go bug picking every morning, and that's a major occupation. But there's some lovely lavenders, and if you want a nursery that has a whole range of lavenders, the national collection is at Downderry Lavender, and Downderry Lavender have a website. So if you're into your lavenders or want a compact plant that will provide fragrance in the garden and attract bees and butterflies, that's it. Any more contributions from the panel? Brian?
I'm now ready. I'm just on the point of lavender. We grow lavender on our allotment. We grow a lot of edible flowers. In fact, my wife has a little side business where she actually provides edible flowers to some restaurants. Restaurants that do buffet or used to do buffet like to use edible flowers, and we've been providing those. On lavender, we use the lavender flowers for baking. But 2 or 3 other plants, one in particular that I want to mention for butterflies that we've grown very successfully is Lantana. It's not a common plant, and it's considered to be an annual here, but it is probably the most attractive plant to butterflies, not dissimilar to buddleia, that I've ever found. And it's a prolific flowerer. A couple of other ideas: all the verbenas tend to attract butterflies, and marjoram attracts butterflies, and zinnias grown as an annual. So those are plants I've just seen from experience are good for them.
Nigel, did you have a comment to add?
Yes, my shirt is attractive to butterflies. I sat in my garden one day in a blue and white shirt, and I think it was called a Jersey tiger moth, landed on my back and sat there for about half an hour. It's been photographed by all the family, and eventually flew away, but obviously it finds me very attractive.
It must be great to know that you're attracted to moths, Nigel.
I can tell you, this was a beautiful, beautiful moth. It was brown and black stripes. I mean, I don't know whether it's a moth or a butterfly, and apparently I checked it up, and this was probably as far north as it's got so far. But absolutely magnificent.
Well done for getting one of those in the garden. Something I've always wanted to see, I have to say. We've got a question now from Maxine, who says, oh, it's an admission, I'm afraid. I've got some very puny broccoli seedlings in my greenhouse. When can I plant them out? So puny broccoli seedlings. Louise, I suspect your broccoli seedlings, when they appear, are robust and full of vigor. So first of all, tell us what should happen with these puny broccoli seedlings, and then tell Maxine for her next sowings how she can make sure that's the last batch of puny ones that she ever sees.
Okay, so the great thing about living on a community is that you don't have to know everything individually. Okay, teamwork makes the dream work, that type of thing. So I've actually got two other members of the community sitting not very far away from me who's just heard the question, and they don't know the answer either, because the person who does the broccoli actually lives at number 1, and they're not back from their other job yet either. So
Louise, we ought to just, can your friends just give us a wave, just pop in and say hello, your sort of consultants?
my one will, one's not, and two, come on, Matthew. Matthew?
Don't be bashful. We're not.
Says, this is Matthew.
Hello, Matthew.
He's known as number 3.
Excellent.
We've got number 2 and my husband at number 5 here. So yeah, but actually what I'd say, it's all about the soil really, isn't it? So I would go to my neighbour's house, for the person who's asked the question, we've got plenty of our own moles, collect a few mole hills, maybe go and find a bit of horse poo or a bit of cow poo, mix it all up, make sure you've got some really nice soil. I think I would go for soil on this one.
My goodness me, that sounds like rocket fuel. Philip, what about your successes with these plants, with these broccoli plants?
Yeah, I assume that the broccoli plants are going to be planted out somewhere, sometime. And so really it's a bit late to plant them out now. I mean, if they're purple sprouting broccoli, my purple sprouted broccoli are now about 3 foot tall. So they're for February, March, April, producing their flowers. But I dare say if she's got these leggy plants, plant them out now. See they're covered because the pigeons are bound to have a go at them, and the slugs as well. And just hope that they might sort of get going. And of course, as somebody said, it is all in the soil. If the soil is well fed and looked after, they've got a chance of growing and get going. So I think that's the best way.
So then, Maxine, get those planted out into the garden and see what happens. The wonderful thing about all of our plants is that they're desperate to grow for us. So I'm sure you will get something from these, particularly if you give them some protection. Now, Betty Rabbi says, is it a good idea to put mushroom compost and manure all over the garden beds now? So anybody starting to prepare their beds for the winter time?
Yes, right. Yeah, I could. Well, I could make a comment on that. I think this is the time to start spreading your compost. And if you've got mushroom compost, okay, fine. So one of the I think tricks of good gardening is to make certain the soil is of good quality. And if you can, at this particular time, and for the next month or two, give your garden a good mulch. And if you're using mushroom compost, I'm sure that's as good in many respects as horse manure and other composts. So I think, and then I would tend to, if you're on an allotment, you cover it up so the rain won't wash the nutrients out too much. But if you're in a garden, as in my London garden, I give it a good 2 or 3 inches of mulch from my home compost, and that improves the soil. So yes, I think if you've got mushroom compost, that's very good stuff.
Brian, do you have any comment about using mushroom compost? Would you use that on all of your plants?
Just a couple of things. Mushroom compost is basically spent compost for mushroom growing, and quite a lot of the spores remain within the compost. And we do often get calls, a week or 2 or 3 after we've used mushroom compost in clients' gardens to say, we've got an awful lot of mushrooms come through. Can we eat them? Or what are you going to do about them? Or why are they there?
And you tell them that they're not to worry, you won't charge them for it.
I've discovered and wonder if anyone knows whether, in fact, you can eat those mushrooms. I mean, they come from edible mushroom preparation.
Yes,
do you know that, do you?
As far as I'm aware, you can. They're coming out. They're just like you say, the spores, and we get mushrooms growing in the fields. So there's no reason, so long as you're certain that they are from those spores, then that's absolutely fine. Obviously, you should never eat any mushrooms that you're not 100% sure of. And also, the only thing, of course, about mushroom compost is that it's alkaline as well, isn't it? So you wouldn't put it on your you know, Philip wouldn't be taking it to the Lake District to put on his rhododendrons.
No.
And the manure should be well rotted, so it's not full of seeds. Now, I wonder if any of the panel have grown fig trees, because it's always lovely to have a fig tree. And Andy Lucas says, I have a fig tree, but I think it needs repotting. When can I repot it? So a lovely fig tree. When can it be repotted? Andy, could we just ask you a little bit more about this? Can we spotlight Andy? Are we able to do this? Andy, would you like to tell us a little bit more about?
I've just shocked poor Andy by spotlighting her, but
Okay.
yes, we want to hear more about your fig tree, Andy.
Oh, about my fig tree. Yeah, it's grown quite big. It came as a cutting from a cousin, and the pot that it's in it's broken. It's a plastic pot, and I need a much bigger pot. So I just wondered when the best time is to repot it. It's got, I had 2 figs from it this year, really yummy ones. And it's got some baby figs on it. So I don't want them to die particularly. And what's the best compost to use?
Brian, have you grown figs at all in containers?
I mean, we do quite a lot of figs out in gardens, and just remember, when you're planting a fig out in a garden, you, generally speaking, the conventional wisdom is that you dig your hole and you actually put something like paving slabs or some other barrier around the sides of the insides of that hole to restrict the root activity for various reasons and to encourage more fruit. Figs in the open ground become bullies, and you do have to be careful. I understand.
That's why it's not in an open ground. I don't have open ground for it.
I mean, in a pot, you can repot it almost at any time as long as it's not in too active a growth. And I wouldn't overpot it up. I'd use quite a loamy, I mean, if you need to always go back to where does the plant hail from and where do figs grow in naturally? They are kind of Middle Eastern, Southern Europe, quite porous ground, but not too rich. I just a plug for I'm quite keen on vegetables that are sustainable. And figs are, it's a fruit that is sustainable. It keeps giving you every year. And so are grapes. So I would encourage members of the community to grow those kinds of things that have a sustainability about them. And whilst I'm mentioning sustainability, I'd also add in things like asparagus is sustainable. Artichokes, globe artichokes, Jerusalem artichokes, rhubarb, soft fruits, various herbs, and of course the fig, as you've mentioned.
Anybody got any comments about figs? Louise, Philip? Could I just add a quick one about figs? Because I've got some figs here at home, and I grow them in pots because I don't have room for them in the ground. And I wanted 3 varieties, so I thought, I know what I'll do. I will get in touch with the person who holds the national collection of figs, because he's the person who will tell me the varieties to grow in a pot and grow it really well. And he gave me White Marseille, Osborne's Prolific, and Rouge de Bordeaux, and they grow really well in pots. When you're growing them in containers, they need repotting probably about every 2 or 3 years. But what you can do to keep them compact is to take them from the pot, and I normally do this just before the beginning of the growing season in the spring, cut the roots back by 1/3 and repot in John Innes number 2 or number 3 with about 20% added grit. So make sure it's all mixed up really nicely. And you talked about keeping them over winter. The small fruits that are about the size of your little fingernail, the tiny ones that you think wouldn't survive, are actually the ones that you want to keep for next year. So either cover it with fleece or put it in a greenhouse or put it somewhere sheltered and then those little fruits can carry on growing and ripening later next year. Now we've got a question from...
Thank you.
That's okay. Question from Nicola Goldsmith. It's a question from Mark and myself. But I don't bring Mark into it. He might not want to be here. So it's a question from Mark and myself. We have a rather old plum tree, but I don't know which variety it was because it was already here. It's a terrible shape, and we would like to be able to control it so it better fits the space. When's the best time to cut it back, and how dramatically can we cut it back for regrowth? So can we spotlight Nicola, please, on this one? Find out a little bit more about this old plum tree. Wonderful to have a characterful old plum tree in the garden, but it does sound as though this one is a little bit out of control. Nicola, tell us more about this plum tree, which does sound gorgeous. Most importantly of all, how does it produce? Do you get a lot of fruit from it?
So this is one of the problems. For the first 15 years or so we were here, it produced incredible fruit. And then over the last 7, 8 to 10 years, it's just been declining in how well it's been producing fruit. Last year, I took out a massive elder that had taken over its space and light, and I was hoping that that would make a big difference this year. It also tends to get covered by Virginia creeper, which comes in from my neighbor. No matter how much I ask my neighbor to stop that happening, it just gets completely enshrouded, so I'm forever cutting that back. But it's become really leggy and really unproductive. And my next door neighbor, my garden is almost, as Philip will tell you, and Philip, it is so lovely to see you. My next door neighbor and I, our gardens are basically produce. There's very little else, ponds and produce. So next door completely chopped the top of their 2 apple trees off. Really dramatic. I thought they were nuts when they did it. And now they've got 2 beautiful, controlled, well-producing trees. And so I'm sort of wondering, can I do the same?
So yes, you sound as though you need to get the saw out, but who's going to tell you the right time of year to do it and how to go about pruning? Philip, you've got a lot of fruit.
Right. Okay.
Ever...
Well, traditionally, you're really supposed to prune plums after they finish fruiting, because there's always the concern if you prune later and in the summer months, you get this leaf curl. But I think with your tree, in view of the fact that you haven't had any fruit for 7 or 8 years, you really could take a bit of a chance and cut it back a bit. So think of the tree that possibly over 2 or 3 years, you'd like to get it back to shape. I can remember that tree actually, so I had a look in your garden. So I would personally take a chance and cut, say, 1/3 of what you really would like to get it back to this year. And I suppose you could even have a go now and take a chance with this silver leaf. And then next year, I hope you might get some fruit, but after, in the summer months, if you don't get any fruit, say late summer, prune another 1/3, and then the following year, do the other 1/3, and you'll get it back to the sort of shape you need. But I'll tell you the best thing to do, Nicola, give me a call. I'll come up and help you do it.
Yes.
Fantastic. That was the answer I was hoping for.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. Okay.
Love you, Philip.
I'm really pleased to see you, Philip. I thought, I know where she's going with this. Good for you. And thank you, Philip, for offering to do that, because it'll be lovely. And I hope that when you finish doing all your pruning and all your hard work, that of course Nicola will share the fruit next time she does some harvest as payment. That's lovely. Thank you for that. So Leslie Danzig has, oh crumbs, she's got slugs in the garden. Oh, haven't we all? They finished off the hostas, and then they started on the rhubarb. Leslie, it sounds dreadful. What else did they have a go at? You're asking, is it normal for slugs to munch rhubarb? But what else did they eat?
Well, once they'd finished with the hostas, they started on anything that looked like tagetes, marigolds, anything.
They like
Been wild.
Yes, they're
I have used coffee grounds. I've now put the hostas in pots and smeared the rims with Vaseline in the hope that the slugs won't like that. But the rhubarb's been nibbled to the ground.
Louise, have you had problems with slugs and rhubarb?
Yeah, yes, of course. Actually, this year wasn't too bad at all, but last year was absolutely awful. So again, coming back to dream work, we take a teamwork, a rota. So each night somebody can go out and scour the polytunnel for the slugs, feed them to the chickens or the fish. It's good protein for them. We also obviously going out to that wildlife pile that's got all the the bugs and different things, but of course hedgehogs, you mentioned hedgehogs. I mean, we do have hedgehogs here. They'll be great having ponds with the frogs, toads, etc. that will eat the slugs. We've also just located a few leopard slugs which eat, so they're big slugs that eat the other slugs. And then the other thing that some of us do is one of us does, Matthew, who you just saw earlier, he's great, preparing a biodynamic slug preparation. And in order to do this, you have to collect the slugs, chop them in half, dry them, and then you have to burn them on a specific day of the year according to the lunar biodynamic preparations. And yeah, make a biodynamic preparation and then sprinkle that on the ground. Preparation from somewhere. So there's a few ideas just to be going on with, but I like beer traps as well.
Well, don't we all? Yeah, the beer traps work well. And if you, we did a test actually with Gardener's Question Time years ago, and we tried some different, the slugs tried some different beers. And we found that Guinness was the most popular, probably because it's very, very sweet. And the other thing is that if you put those slug traps in February, at the end of February, then you take out quite effectively the first generation of slugs that come in a year. So we're starting to run out of time now, and the questions are coming in, so we'll need some snappy answers. So Lillian Cordell has just built a cold frame from an old shower door, and she was going to be chucked out. What's the best winter veg to grow in the cold frame, Brian?
I think you can grow, there's winter lettuce. You can grow quite a lot of brassicas in the cold frame over winter. Lamb's ears are quite good. Mazuma. Quite a number of the herbs will survive the winter. But look at the brassicas, quite a lot of them will do well. Cabbages and winter cabbages, and some of the lettuces, winter lettuces.
And you can be sowing and growing your cut and come again as well, can't you now? And the oriental vegetables are excellent. So there's plenty for you to start trialing in your cold frame there, Lillian. Just a quick insert here from Angelina. In Patians or the Busy Lizzies, of course, we're talking primarily about the new Guinea hybrids for indoors in older people's homes. They're lovely, colourful flowers. They like the heat, doesn't need much attention, and smaller pots mean larger flower yield. So thank you for that one, Angelina. Now, Jonathan Samuel says, I've got a small garden overhung by my neighbour's trees on two sides, but getting some sun in the morning from the east, and a small northwest facing border in my house wall on the other side. Are there any flowering or fruiting trees that you can recommend me to plant without causing subsidence to the house? So this is from Jonathan Samuel. Got a small garden overhung by neighbours' trees, gets a little bit of sun in the morning, and a small northwest facing border on the other side. What kind of fruit trees or flowering trees would you put in there, Brian? Without causing subsidence to the house, of course, which is very important.
Tricky. I mean, one of the things that we've done quite successfully and is very nice is, I don't know what they now call them. They used to be called Ballerina fruit trees. Do you know there's now a new name? It's a sort of restricted pyramidal fruit tree.
Yeah, they've been minarets for a while, weren't they?
minarets, yes, and ballerinas. I mean, these are trees that don't generally grow more than about 3 or 4 meters. They're extremely compact. They grafted onto a rootstock that's suitable for them never to really need pruning. I mean, what more do you want than a tree that needs no pruning and gives you fruit? And so try the minarets or ballerinas. They're generally available online.
Okay, that's absolutely lovely.
You can get them in plum, in apple, in pears, all sorts of varieties of fruit in that format.
So thank you for that. So our next question is from Ben. Ben Spooky, if a shed is not required anymore and we get rid of it, what can we do with the space? Perhaps something that will grow on concrete. Philip, would you like to have a go at what could you grow perhaps on containers rather than breaking up the concrete and having to take it all away, something that would grow nicely, or perhaps creating raised beds, something that would grow in raised beds? What would you have to do?
If you ask me, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think as your suggestion, Matthew, is very likely the best one. If you created a raised bed, say, which would have 6 to 8 inches of soil, you could grow a vast array of plants in there. I mean, it's quite amazing. Plants don't need enormous depth unless you're growing trees. So you could grow almost everything, vegetables as well as flowers, plants. But of course, you can always use pots. I mean, I must have about 30 pots in my garden with miniature trees as well as annuals and some perennials. So you could always have masses of pots, and pots in themselves can be very decorative in their own right. Grasses as well. So you've got a vast array of things. So I wouldn't bother to dig it up and either make a nice raised bed, as you suggested, or a nice selection of pots with some interest in the pots themselves.
And I suppose if you can get wooden containers as well, Philip, you could perhaps paint those to bring a little bit of extra colour, or you could recycle tins to grow your carrots in, or parsnips, or whatever it may be. So you could end up with an absolutely wonderfully colourful garden that's productive and recycling at the same time. And I suppose I ought to give my old pal Bob Flowerdew a bit of a plug, because he was the one, of course, who felt that the whole world should use recycled tyres for raised beds, which were effective but not particularly attractive.
I'll tell you what he could also add. If you wanted to have some troughs, you can make troughs out of old sinks, put some concrete round them so they're quite decorative, and out of a trough you can have a whole little alpine garden. And that I can recommend that. That's really made a lovely feature, interesting feature.
That's a great idea. And alpines are, if you want to be trendy in horticulture at the moment, alpines are currently trendy. They're on their way back, for that very reason, that they are excellent in courtyards and on balconies and in confined spaces. You can have a wonderfully attractive display, but doesn't take up too much space. Francis Berkeley says, do you have any advice for growing strong rhubarb? My rhubarb gives me about 6 puny, spindly sticks, and I'd love to have a proper harvest. So, Philip, as you're laughing, you've got the answer. Come on, give Francis the opportunity to grow some good rhubarb.
Well, in my Lake District garden, I've got a clump of rhubarb, which was there actually when we arrived. So we're now talking about 45 years ago, and it's the most enormous clump, and it flowers profusely after I picked it. The flower must be 6 foot tall, so you can't stop it growing, even if you chop it back. But in my allotment in London, I've now purchased 3 lots of rhubarb, and I actually can't get them to grow at all. So obviously I haven't got the knack for a London rhubarb. I'm a good Lake District rhubarb man, but not a good London rhubarb man.
Well, of course, the Lake District will be perfect for your rhubarb because it's nice and moist, and you've got plenty of moisture-retentive, free-draining soil. But yes, you ought to be able to grow rhubarb in London. So, Brian, how do you grow yours?
I agree. Free-draining soil are very. I mean, I have found that open, sunny positions are better. Although they do grow in shade. But I think one of the big secrets to them is to protect the crown in winter, by putting a bit of straw. Some people even fold the old leaves over the top of them as they die back, and to really mulch heavily. I mean, I put gallons of compost onto my rhubarb, and they seem to love it and absorb it and produce 3 lots of stems a year in my Child's Hill allotments. So plenty feed and protect in winter.
And the key thing when you plant them as well is to make sure that you don't plant them too deeply. I think a lot of people think that they need, because they've got big leaves and grow very vigorously to produce a lot of stems, that they need boggy and waterlogged conditions. They need, just as you say, Brian, moisture retentive, but nice and free draining. Otherwise, they're likely to rot off. And a year like this, or particularly latterly, would have been absolutely superb for them. Muswell Hill Synagogue ask, and I'll quickly answer this one so that we can keep the pace going. When's the best time to put up bird boxes, and when's the best time to build a mini pond? Well, bird boxes can go up now because the birds use them for roosting over the winter time, both the bird boxes with the small holes in for the blue tits, for example, and the open fronted ones for birds, particularly like robins. When's the best time to build a new pond? Well, really, it's almost any time. Winter, if you built something now, you would find the occupants would find it very quickly, but also in the spring. It doesn't have to be big. If you just get a washing up bowl and sink that into the ground, that can be used as well. So our next question is Angelina says that autumn glory attracts butterflies. It blooms through the end of autumn, so it's a good source for butterflies. And when the other flowers have faded, or autumn glory is easy to propagate from cuttings. And that is sedum, I would have thought she's talking about. And yes, a correction as well, that it's autumn glory, if you're looking to buy it, is also known as Herbstfreude. So you'll see it under both names. I do apologise here. I noticed as well that Nigel raised his hand to contribute to the rooftop question. I think that was a little bit earlier on, yes. We're just getting plenty of answers. I would refer actually to you, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, just to, obviously the panel haven't seen these questions beforehand, so they're answering brilliantly off the top of their heads. And it's nice to have the delegates, the audience, the friends chipping in as well. So for slugs, Nemeslug works really well. And of course, that's an environmentally friendly way of killing the slugs. Best time to apply that is when the ground is moist, either in July or in September. We've got some really positive comments here about Braeburn ballerinas that were bought. This is Nicola Goldsmith says we've done really well with Braeburn apples, ballerinas grafted, bought at RHS Wisley, who are super helpful. Darren says that he's using the hard standing for bonfires and fires and a seating area, and it's lovely in the summer and also in the winter for toasting marshmallows. And I'm sure Darren would say to you as well, you know, get a barbecue there with the herbs and grow your herbs nearby, so you can literally just cut everything off straight from the plant onto the barbecue. And Liz and Daniel say, what's the best mulch for the whole garden? We're going back to mulching again. It is a kind of seasonal thing. Let's focus a little bit more on mulching and the types of materials that you can use for mulching. Louise, you'll do a lot of mulching, I think, in your gardens. Tell us about the different kinds of mulch you use and actually how you create that mulch.
Okay, so first of all, you get a sheep and then you shear it and then you use the fleece, as that can be used. Mulch, put that around the raspberry and blackcurrant bushes earlier this year, along with a good pile of the neighbour's cow poo. What else? Wood chip. So obviously getting that pruning, we've got a chipper as well. So chip down a lot of wood chip and use that. Ash, potash from the fire, and Oh yes, just got the other answers from my. Oh, it's back to front on there, isn't it? Leaf mould, comfrey, and wood chip, which I remembered, and nettles. Obviously, nettles are great. Comfrey is fantastic, isn't it, as well? So.
Yes, and they're all really useful liquid feeds, aren't they? The nettles and the comfrey.
Yeah, or you can put them in the compost, or just rot them down a little bit and then just put them on. Yeah, any of that.
Bocking 14 is a really good comfrey to grow. It's more compact and doesn't spread as much. We're now coming to the conclusion of the last question. So, Brian, any more thoughts on mulch?
Well, obviously, you know, homemade compost is the best form of mulch. But failing that, I'm interested in the sheep shearings. And we don't have a lot of sheep near us. And I haven't seen any wandering around the streets of Hampstead. However, you can buy sheep wool, and we've experimented using it against slugs, actually, going back to an earlier question. We found that it seemed to be successful. So beside the nematodes for slugs, the sheep shearings, the sheep pellets, wool pellets are excellent against slugs. I mean, there's also bark mulches. The problem with bark, you don't want to use anything fresh, because in fact it can deplete your soil, because it requires quite a lot of nutrients to break it down. So I'm not in favor of putting things like fresh grass clippings or, you know, wood from that's been shredded from trees straight onto the ground where you want to grow things. They do have their place on paths and other places. So bark, and then there's lots of mulches that you can buy from commercial growers. I mean, the closest one for London is Thompson's, who are in Cruise Hill, who sell a very nice product called Mixon Mulch, which is shreddings from wood shreddings and leaf mold. And that, it's not expensive. You can pay 45 or 50 quid for a ton bag, plus a bit of delivery. It goes a long way. You do need to check whether it's, some of them are acidic and some of them have more lime in them, and you should check that depending on what plants you have in your garden. The disadvantage of the larger chips of bark mulch, which really hold in moisture, which is its greatest advantage, is that the birds and the foxes like to pull it about in the garden and splash it all over the place, because quite a large proportion of a fox's diet actually is worms. And that's why they scratch up your lawns. And actually another thing you can do, I just thought of this off the cuff, is you could scarify your lawn, pull out all the moss and put it on your beds as a mulch.
Excellent idea. Excellent idea. Thank you for that, Brian. Now, while I leave the remainder of the panel to think of their topical tips that they're going to give us to boost our gardens in the coming year, you might have noticed that Nigel's been quite quiet. So let's just go back to check he's awake.
I'm here.
Good man. Nigel, you're relatively new to gardening. Tell us how it's changed your life.
Well, I'm relatively new here. I would just like to add something to the mulching. I've got a small garden here, and I don't have any trees in the garden. But my neighbours in the street have a lot of trees. And in the autumn, it's thick with leaves, and my neighbours blow out all their leaves into the street, so there's even more leaves. And my children think I'm mad when I go out with my wheelbarrow and I collect the whole street of leaves. I put it in a corner, and 2 years later, I have about 6 solid bags of leaf mold, which makes perfect mulch. Not only does it make perfect mulch, but the soil I've inherited when I came to Finchley is solid clay. And bit by bit, it's beginning to break down and soften. Also, they chop trees down in the area. And every time they chop a tree down, I go down and get them to give me bags of the cuttings. I have seats made of the blocks that they have. I have the mulch, which I don't put near anything tender. I use the wood mulch against anything that's established, because, as been said before, it drains the soil, particularly it takes the nitrogen out of the soil. But by using all these things, bit by bit, the soil is becoming better, the growth is becoming better, and I don't have any real problems now. What I do love here, I've got to tell you, is the sun. To go out and get that sun, and all these plants providing sugar from the sun is absolutely incredible.
It's wonderful, Nigel, to hear you say that, because so often you feel in this world we've lost that sense of wonder. We've lost the excitement about the power and the extraordinary nature of nature, really. So that's a cracking thought, and an excellent gardening tip, because of course in our streets and around at the moment, the leaves are starting to fall. So if we start at the beginning, it'll just get better. Nigel, I saw you raise your hand. Do you have something else you'd like to say?
There's just one more thing. In a small garden, when you run out of space, start growing up the way. Plenty of room up above to keep growing up and up. Climbers, clematises, climbing roses, whatever you can think of. My garden's surrounded by them now, and it's wonderful. I love looking at it.
And do you have a favourite clematis? Because they're very popular plants. Which one do you particularly like?
I can't remember the names of them. There's a very new one, a purpley one, that's just growing against a new fence. I've got 6 different clematises. None of them are Lantanas. I had Lantanas in my old house, and they sort of took over everywhere. So I tend to be very careful that I buy ones that I can control.
Excellent. That's fantastic. It sounds as though you've got a really lovely garden, and you've cracked the art of making the most of a small space, which is
I hope so.
Really inspirational as well. So it's not just tomatoes, there's tomatoes and more. So great topical tips there. Philip, what would your topical tip be for this time of year?
I think actually my topical tips have been covered by some of the comments about compost. But my topical tip is the soil is the key to growing good things. And if you can put compost on your soil, the best compost is homemade compost. So every garden, possibly this winter, should plan to build a small or large, depending on the size, a compost bin, which you can put all your garden waste, plus any vegetable waste, not cooked waste, but all vegetable waste from your cauliflowers and cabbages and so on, and also leaves as well. If you've got the space to separate your leaves, then fine, you can have those in a separate container. A wired netted container would be ideal, but leaves take about possibly a year or 2 to break down properly, whilst compost, you should be able to make good compost heap within 6 or 7 months. And I think that is the key to having a really good garden and with lovely plants, is to have your compost spread. And in my garden, I've been here for decades. And so it has about, I suppose now, about 10, 12 inches of compost on the soil. And things grow quite magnificently, within the context of London gardens. And also similarly in the Lake District, all the beds, not the alpines, of course, but the herbaceous beds and fruit garden, they get a good dollop of compost every year. And I think that helps to make really good plants. So my topical tip is build your compost bin this year if you don't have one, and make your own compost. And it'll save you a lot of money as well.
Fantastic tip, Philip. Fantastic. The answer lies in the soil. Louise, what advice have you got for us?
I think, yeah, absolutely. Soil's where it's at, and I think it was Brian who mentioned getting a ton bag of mulch or whatever. So once you've used that mulch, keep that ton bag, and then you can make big compost with that, with all the wood chip. But actually, what I was going to say is review. It's really important, a permaculture principle, and is to just sit back, maybe make some apple juice with the apples that you've harvested, maybe even some cider vinegar. which we can give to the chickens, the sheep and the humans, have a drink, have a bit of courgette cake, and review what's gone on, what worked well, what didn't work well, what we can do differently, what we can do the same. It's really important to do that, and to really enjoy the food that maybe you processing the food. Obviously, I mean, that's the motivation for the next year, isn't it? Oh, that was delicious, I want to make that again, or oh, that wasn't so nice, I want to try that recipe, etc. So yeah, lots of
excellent advice, Louise. Don't want to just do all the hard work without enjoying the pleasure and blessings of eating. Brian, your tip, please.
My tip is partly topical, and that is, look at your trees. This is the last look you're going to get this year of the trees still in leaf. Look at them changing. Look at the glory and the wonder. Love them, hug them, enjoy them. Look at their shape. Look at their form. Look at their color. Look at them changing color. And then if you have fruit trees, be more practical. Look at those as well, but look for dead and crossing wood. Take it out. Get ready to prune your apples and your pears. You don't prune plums now, as we now all know. And my hope is that we can all just thoroughly appreciate the trees we've got, and perhaps even plant a few more.
Oh, that's lovely, Brian. That's absolutely lovely. And you know, you slipped in just a great piece of advice just then, because with COVID and all the problems that we have, we can't hug each other, but we can still hug a tree. So that's that is the way ahead. So thank you very much indeed for all those who asked the questions, and also to the panel. But for the formal vote of thanks, I'm going to pass you over now to Rabbi David Mason.
Matthew, thank you so much. What an evening. What a special evening. There are so many quotable quotes from this evening, from all the panelists, of course, from you, Matthew. You know, the extraordinary nature of nature is going to stick with me. Just this Sukkot, just this week, last week, we sat and ate a salad that was made of vegetables from our garden. We have a small garden, and the joy that we all had, my wife I should give credit for, is the grower. I bring the birds into the garden, and this COVID period has just, for me, changed my life in its relationship to nature in a way that brings so much joy, so much passion, so much interest, and so much more real connection to nature, to the extent that I could sit through the last nearly 90 minutes and really get so much out of it and understand and take on. And I'll be looking forward to that tomato chutney with our green tomatoes left over. I'm not sure I'm not sure the sheep will be coming near me. So sorry, Louise. But so, you know, it's been wonderful. And for me, it's fascinating because my father, who's actually, I'm pretty sure, in the Zoom room with my mother's a mycologist, and my father is an expert in mycorrhiza, worked for the civil service in Edinburgh. I was brought up with mycelium and loads of different forays into the wilds of Scotland, where I was brought up. That's my upbringing. I then studied economics at Massey University and became a rabbi. So I was a heretic. But now this week, we went back to Coleford Wood with my mum and dad. I live in Muswell Hill. We went to Coleford Wood, and my dad was explaining to my daughter and other kids about mycelium and the hugging glove of the roots and how mushrooms are grown. And it was a sort of return to enjoying that, and actually that being real. So Matthew, a ginormous thanks to being able to get to know you, even if it's through Zoom and this medium, and the way you led was just superb. And of course, our panel, you were really amazing. Philip, Louise, Brian, and Nigel, all of you just gave different elements and color to this evening, and really complemented each other. I think we need to give a massive thanks to Rabbi Mark, whose idea was and has come through and made this a really great thing. Of course, to the other rabbis of Eco Synagogue, Tanya and Jonathan, and that we should be clear also that Eco Synagogue is developing, is enriching, is bringing more and more communities across Britain closer to a sense of environmental efficiency and an awareness of our relationship to the environment and nature. So please do keep in touch, everyone, with Eco Synagogue if you haven't. and be in touch with us if you need help to bring your community on board. And of course, Andrea, we cannot forget Andrea, Andrea Pass, who does masses of work for us and really is a power at the center of moving our organization, our project forward with the Board of Deputies. So thank you so much, Andrea, to all of you, and over to Rabbi Tanya.
I would like to join Rabbi David in thanking Matthew. Thank you so much. As a newish gardener since the lockdown, I found the whole evening fascinating, and to a wonderful panel. Thank you so much for a fantastic evening, certainly for me. And I would like to conclude our evening with a prayer. The world is full of wonder.
She's the rabbi.
Of creation, the mercy of Creator, and the grace of the universe. May the eager intentions of our hearts and our hands be fulfilled in our gardens. May the bounty and the beauty of our gardens fill our hearts with so much joy. May we rejoice in the company of each other and appreciate the wonders of nature that we are blessed with every day. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, oseh ma'aseh bereshit. We praise the eternal God, sovereign of the universe, the marvels of your creation. Hag Sameach, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight again. Thank you very much.
Hag Sameach to everybody. Let's give each other a wave, unmute, and shout a Hag Sameach.
Have a lovely Chag. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thanks, Samaya.
Thank you, and thank you, Matt. That was wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for making me so welcome, as usual.
Thank you.
Oh, you were superb, really.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, Jonathan.